This is music, and this is a Fistful of Death. Welcome to another First Impressions video. In these videos I share with you my first impressions of the many blind buys I've picked up lately. This time I have a good stack of CDs to talk about, 10 of them I think. So let's get cracking. Up first, Anthrax, We've Come For You All. This one I think came out in 2003 and I wasn't interested in it at all because I had lost interest in Anthrax in the 90s. I love the sound of White Noise. That's a fantastic album. I still think it's a fantastic album. But after that, they went in a musical direction that didn't interest me. So I wasn't interested in this one when it came out. But I found this copy recently very, very cheap in kind of a record store outlet. And I decided to pick it up and give it a chance. And it starts out really strong. It starts out with some thrashy stuff, some really cool groovy stuff. You have some great riffs in the first half of this album, and they even play around a bit with grindcore in places, which I think is interesting. John Bush sounds fantastic throughout most of the album, so it starts out really strong, but it does run out of steam. The balloon is slowly deflating, and by the point they reach the song Cadillac Rock Box, I think is what it's called, there's no air left in the balloon at all, which is a bit of a shame. So it starts out really strong and ends on a bit of a whimper, and although this one, like I said, I believe it's from 2003, but I could be wrong, so it's from the 2000s, it still sounds a bit like a band trying to navigate the 90s music scene for some reason. But overall, it's not a bad album, but I do prefer the first half of the album. And the second half is probably not something I will listen to a whole lot. Up next, Blind Illusion, Wrath of the Gods. I believe it's their comeback album. And this one is pretty damn good. It's thrash metal. It's slightly technical, it's progressively leaning, it's also quite melodic, so I think a lot of people would consider it maybe power thrash. And I do get a bit of a similarity between this album and Artillery's style of thrash metal, with the exception that this one is a little bit more leaning towards the progressive side of things. You have some great riffs, great energy, really awesome production I think on here, and one thing I really like is that they do have elements of 90s thrash. You do have some groove metal stuff, but it's kind of like they skipped the entire part of the groove metal history where everything was samey and watered down. So it's kind of like early 90s groove metal stuff that pops up every now and then, which I think is pretty cool. An example is Spaced, and I believe it's Lucifer's Awakening. They're quite groovy songs. So great stuff, fantastic musicianship, super enjoyable album, and I think it's their comeback, and if it is, it's a very strong comeback. If it's not their comeback album, it's just a very strong album. The vocals are, I think they're okay. The vocalist can definitely sing. He leans a bit towards a slightly gruffer voice, and I think it would have been cooler with vocals along the lines of what you hear typically in power thrash. So like Think Again, contemporary Artillery, for example. But yeah, great album. Really enjoyed this one. If you like your power thrash and your prog thrash and all that stuff, that one is worth checking out. Now, I said this was a Fistful of Death. I have a bunch of death metal. So up first we have Based, and it's called Justitia maybe, Justitia perhaps, and also by Best this one here, and it's called Venenum or something like that. So great, very original, I think, death metal by this band. I think they're from Aarhus in Denmark. Best. Super awesome stuff. You definitely have a lot of brutality. You have elements of technical death metal, but you also have just cool riffs, spread out over the album. You have things that are a little bit weird every now and then that I quite enjoy too. So this is super strong death metal. One thing I really like is the guitar solos are, I don't know if they were inspired by Ralph Santalla and that type of death metal guitarist who would use very, very melodic guitar solos on top of, brutal death metal back in the day. A lot of the guitar solos are hard rocking, and I really enjoy that. So melodic, they're hard rocking, obviously. Guys who know how to play the guitar. So this, I think, is Best. Fantastic death metal band, and these two releases are absolutely fantastic. If you like your death metal and you don't mind it a little bit original, check out these two. I think they kick ass, that's for sure. Okay, up next, kind of a fun thing, Clawfinger Warfare, the remix EP. So so this is a handful of remixes of songs from their first album, and so they're more in a kind of industrial techno, 90s techno based, not unch techno though, but more the other kind of more edgy techno music that was out in the 90s. So you do still have the groovy guitars, you have the rappy vocals, but then it's mixed in with electronica elements, again 90s techno stuff, and it's very interesting. I do prefer the original songs on all of them, but it's very interesting to hear alternative versions of them for sure. But when I listened to this, it did make me want to go back and just listen to the the album, Deaf, Dumb and Blind, I think. No, that's the second one, right? The first one is just self-titled. Well, whatever. There will be some text here, giving you the information. So, kind of industrial. If you're into industrial metal, this is worth checking out. I do prefer the original versions, but it's a fun thing to have, and I probably won't get rid of this one, just because it's fun, and I'll listen to it every now and then. Up next, not much to show here, but this is the Chickenfoot album. It came in Digipack, which I have stored safely somewhere else. Hard rock, kind of a super group, with basically all the instrumentalists are virtuosos in their own rights, and then you have hard rocking vocals. So obviously the musicianship top notch. Very enjoyable stuff, hard rock. It's not as mind-blowing as I thought it would be, but it's solid, enjoyable hard rock with some cool guitar work, solid drumming, And one thing that I think is interesting is that it sounds like a band. Doesn't sound like some star musicians that were brought together. It actually does sound like a band. I think that's very interesting given the nature of this kind of project, as it were. So if you like your hard rock, this one is worth checking out. I mean, I enjoyed it. I wasn't blown away by it, but I enjoyed it. Okay, some more death metal, because it is a Fistful of Death. So here we have None So Vile by Cryptopsy. This one came in a massive digipack. I have that stored safely somewhere else. So this is kind of brutal death metal, kind of technical too. With a lot of old school elements for sure, but it's almost like it takes Suffocation to the next level, if you know what I mean. And I also gave this one a spin, a more recent Cryptopsy release, and it is called Tome to the Book of Suffering. Also technical brutal death metal, but this one obviously has a more modern sound to it. But the style is not too dissimilar on these two albums. That said, I have to admit I much prefer Blasphemy Made Flesh to these two, but these two are great as well. The vocals on here, None So Vile, are a bit more varied. On here, they're a bit more focused, but here you have some guttural growls, you have some screams, and you have some squeals, but we're not talking silly slam death metal pig squeals. The squeals on here are more like almost like horrifying screams, so it actually works quite well. Doesn't make me think of that scene from Deliverance, which all those slam death metal vocalists, they always make me think of that scene. So yeah, this is great. A brutal technical death metal. Lots of blast beats, but also lots of riffs, and also lots of cool, weird kind of breakdowns with some bass work popping up. And the bass is actually quite audible and almost central in the mix on both of these, in particular on the EP here. So definitely worth checking out if you want some brutal technical death metal, but you're kind of maybe tired of slam death metal. This to me is much better than slam death metal. Actually, can't even compare them. So this is excellent stuff. But like I said, I do prefer Blasphemy Made Flesh just because it's much more old school. Up next, Deadhead Slave Driver. I believe this is also a comeback album. If it is, it's a super strong comeback album. This is excellent stuff. Fantastic thrash metal. It has a very modern production for sure, but it doesn't sound clinical or anything like that. It just the production just fits the aggressive thrash metal very well, and I think it wouldn't have sounded as good had the production been less modern, if you know what I mean. Super tight playing, fantastic aggressive thrash metal throughout the entire album. They do slow down every now and then, just to give you a breather. The vocals sound super angry. This is great stuff. Really love this album for sure. And I'll blast some more death metal. We have this one here, Defiled, and it's called Infinite Regress. Japanese death metal. This is the second Defiled album I've heard. I've heard In Crisis, which I really like, but the production on that one is insane. So there are places where you can barely hear what's going on. The production on here is more approachable. The music is very interesting. It's death metal, lots of old school death metal parts, lots of Mike Smith style blast beats too. And some of the songs, I think it's in the third song, Tragedy, that has a bit of a black metal vibe to it, although it's a death metal song. Very interesting. Maybe it's just me who's weird. The songs are pretty short too. I like that, like between 2 and 3 minutes, most of them. I like that, actually. One thing that might be challenging to some listeners is that there are lots of stops and starts and twists and turns and not a lot of transitions. So you might, go from one blast beat part to an old school death metal riff, and then it stops, and then blast beat part again, and then old school death metal riff, and then some third part. So I think some people might find it weird, but I kind of like how challenging, without being overly technical or anything like that, but how challenging each song is with all those stops and starts and twists and turns. The vocals are standard death metal vocals, and they work. So I actually think this is a pretty great album. I've heard a lot of people talk kind of negatively or finding it a bit meh, but I really enjoy this one. I think it's nice with a death metal album with shorter songs, and again, like all the changes and twists and turns, I find them interesting. Also, awesome cover art. So there you go. A good stack of CDs. We had everything from hard rock over 90s techno metal or whatever to death metal. And Even the Anthrax one had some good things that I could enjoy. The Clawfinger one was interesting, but it did make me want to go back and listen to the actual album that the songs came from. So do check out these artists and these releases if they sound interesting to you. Thanks for watching.